Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment, and this is session 11. And what we're going to do is start off with looking at the three verses that we have under consideration. Romans chapter 8, verses 28 to 30. And here they are. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Moreover, whom He did predestinate, them He also called. And whom He called, them He also justified. And whom He justified, them He also glorified. Now I'm going to put up on the PowerPoint, there's a lot of terminology that we've covered in these verses, and I just want to make sure that we have in our minds, because we're going to finish all the way from 28 to 30 today. And I told you last time we're going to start moving through these terms quicker. We're going to do all the rest of the terms. But to make sure that you don't have anything lacking, let's go over this terminology and know that we understand what's being said here. The all things in verse 28 refers to everything that's going to be happening in your life, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or it doesn't even have to be good or bad. It just, whatever happens in your life. That's the all things. Anybody have any question about that? Everybody understands that? I think we've got that. The next one is all things work together with the sonship education. No, it didn't say that in the verse, but you know those things by themselves can't produce that. It has to be together. That word together is linking that with the sonship education. We ought to be well aware of that. Is any question about that? Okay. Number 3, all things work together with the sonship curriculum for good, which is for our benefit, and that benefit is referring to the training and the experience that we're going to get now for our use later in the creature. Any question about that? Everybody knows what the good is referring to. Okay? And to them that love God is that first qualifying phrase that refers to the love a son has for his father, that stems from the sonship relationship and from the sonship life. It's not just having some fond affection for God. Every believer has that. This is the particular kind of love that a son has for his father as he engages in the sonship education. The second qualifying phrase, to them who are the called, refers to those who have responded to the call to the sonship education. And they've responded positively, of course. Any question about those qualifying phrases? Okay. Next, according to His purpose, refers to His purpose of having sons and daughters labor with Him in His business in eternity. That's what God decided to do. Any question about that? Then verse 28, we've got sewed up, right? Okay. And we've done some work in 29. For whom He did foreknow, says that God knew ahead of time that He would have sons labor with Him in His business. That's all that's referring to. That God could have done it by Himself. The Father could have done it by Himself. He could have done it in conjunction with the Son and the Spirit, the other members of the Godhead. But instead He decided that He would have sons do this with Him. And that's what He foreknew. That's the whom that He foreknew is those sons. All right, there's the whole review. Any question about anything in that review that's unclear or uncertain in your mind? You promised me that if there was, you would say it. Okay, no question? Then we're moving on. So verse 29 is where we're going to take up, right where we left off last time. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. Now, God not only thought about having sons and daughters labor with Him out in the creature in eternity and to run His business, but He also predestined them to something. And I want to talk about that word as in fact, we could just break that word down. Pre always means what? All right, before. And now, it's predestinate, but I'm putting predestinated. It doesn't matter. Give me another word that has that in its root. Well, here, we'll just do the predestinate. Fine. Huh? Destiny. Very good. There's the first one I'm looking for. What's the next one? Destined? I'm going to, okay, that's kind of in destiny, so I'm going to leave that up. Destination. There's the two words I'm really after. Now, and you might come up with a couple of more, that's fine, but these two will be enough to do everything that we want to do. Because, now, putting that together, what does the word predestinate mean? It means that God has determined a destiny before it happened. Or He has determined a destination before you ever got there. Right? And by the way, do you ever predestinate anything? You do it all the time. If you ever take a trip, you know where you're going and you have determined ahead of time where your destination is. So when again, I just want to make the point, you don't have to be omnipotent God to do the things that are being talked about in these verses. In this context, we've all done these kinds of things before. Now, that being said, do you know then that when a father has a child, and let's go back to when adoption was practiced in the culture, he didn't just look at this and go, oh, a baby's on the way, we got to have a room set up with a baby bed and and all that kind of bit. He's really looking much further down the road. What's the day he's looking for? He's looking for the day he's going to adopt this child to go into the business with him. And to do that, that means he's talking, before the baby's ever born. Now, what's the age of adoption? About 12. That means before the baby's ever born, he's already thinking about things that are going to happen when this baby is, he's going to move from childhood, start moving into adulthood, and start getting trained. He's thinking about that years and years in advance. So, with that in our minds, he is determining, he is setting by the way, if he's thinking about using this kid in the family business, isn't he beforehand setting a destiny for this child? He absolutely is. He's predestinating something to be happening. Okay, now that is keeping everything in the very context it needs to be kept in. It's in the sonship context. So God, who did know from the beginning that He was going to have sons and daughters labor with Him, knowing that in order for them to have that destiny, or arrive at, can I say it this way? Arrive at the destination of being fully capable sons to labor with Him in His business, He's got to go to work and do something, doesn't He? He's got to plan some things. It won't happen by accident. I think I've mentioned to you before, I was already married and had kids, and my dad and mom came up to visit, and my dad and I were riding. I guess we were running to the store to pick something up, and I always loved spending time with my dad. And we were riding together, and I just had such respect for him, and I looked over and I said, Dad, when all the years I was growing up, I don't know if you know, but you were the closest friend I ever had. None of my buddies were any closer to me than you. And my dad looked at me and he kind of smiled and he said, I planned it that way on purpose. It never dawned on me. He was arranging that to be that way. I just thought, how lucky. It turned out like this. And now he's telling me it's that way on purpose. You know what he did? He predestined something about that relationship. My point is this, it wasn't a happy accident. It was absolutely what he thought about. And a father is going to do that. And our Father, this is part of the confidence that you get, our Father didn't just leave it to an accident. When He thought about us ahead of time, He went to work and He did some things and He made provision. And this is, by the way, part of the provision. In fact, as we're going to go through the steps today, the first thing He did was to foreknow us, that He would know about us ahead of time. And now we find the next thing is Predestinate. And that's the second step in His provision. And we're going to see the rest of those steps as well. And so, now, just looking at verse 29, in fact, I'll just put it up. Look at that verse before I change screens here. What is the destination that God predestinated us to? What's the destiny? I'm sorry? Okay, but I want that's true. But pull it out of verse 29.
To be the image of His Son.
To be, okay. He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son. That's the destination. That's what that's what He preset in motion as the final destination, to be conformed to the image of His Son. And we're going to do some work on this because you need to know what it is to be conformed to the image of His Son. And we have to know what that image is. And then you've got that last phrase, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren. If you didn't have that phrase and you just put a period at the end of Son, wouldn't that verse still make perfect sense? Yeah, for whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son. You can get that. Why that last phrase? Why tack that on? That's a very important reason. You think you have the answer? Do you?
Yeah.
Huh? Do you? I still, the beginning, okay, that He might be the firstborn among many brethren, is telling us something. Well, we'll look at it when we highlight this part of the verse when we get over there. Just keep those thoughts in your mind. Now, so in order for them to do that labor, folks, this had to be done. If you're going to labor with Him in His business, you really do need to be conformed to the image of His Son. Now, again, we'll explain more about that as we go along. But notice that it did not say, for whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of the Lord Jesus Christ. Why did it not say that? Isn't that who the Son is? Mm-hmm. It is. But why didn't it say that? There is a reason here. This terminology is so precise. Look, let me just show you something. Let me back up. I'm going to have to back all the way up, aren't I? Okay, 28. Look at 28. 28 is talking to sons, is it not? It is. But remember, sons isn't even in the verse. Instead it says, we know that all things work together for good. He could have just said, to sons. But He didn't. He said, to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. And why didn't He just use the word sons? Because He's differentiating between sons and sons. Some sons don't meet those qualifications, and they're not going to be able to labor with Him in a position. They won't be qualified or equipped. Are you with me? But they're all sons, right? All the believers are sons. So He leaves the word out, and instead of saying to sons, which would make you say every believer, He qualifies it. Look at the genius now of verse 29. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. Why not the Lord Jesus Christ? Because you're not being conformed. This is not just a technicality. You're not being conformed to the image of Jesus. Because when you think of Jesus, what pops into your mind? What do you see?
Of deity. You know, he's God.
Okay, you see that he's deity. Okay. What else though? When you think of Jesus, what do you immediately reference? Do you think about him as he was in eternity past? Or do you think about him as he was in his earthly ministry in Israel's program? That's how that defaults in your head. And you know what? Because that's in Israel's program, you're not being conformed to that. You're not being conformed to Jesus. You're not being conformed to Christ, because that's the word for Messiah. Are you being made a Messiah? No. Here's the one I left out, Lord. Are you being conformed to being a Lord? No, you're not. You know what you're being conformed to be? Say it. A son, Beverly. I knew you were thinking, I should have said that, so I wanted to pull it out. You're being conformed to be a son. So look at the terminology. To be conformed to the image of his Son. It's Jesus in his sonship. You say, but wait a minute. When Jesus was educated, he was educated as a son in Israel's program. Here's what you're forgetting. He had to be educated as a son in the dispensation of grace, just like he was educated as a son in Israel's program. He was educated as a son in both, and he had to learn them both. There was nothing automatic about either one of those. Are you with me there? So you have to say to yourself, when did he get schooled in being a son? We know when that happened when he was in Israel's program. Remember, the prophets talked about he woke up every morning, he spent time with his father, and he was trained all that time. Well, listen, when he went back, he underwent the training as a son. He is God. He could have just known it. Bingo. But do you know what? He's going through the same process he's calling us to go through as a son. And guess what? That's the image we're being conformed to. That of his Son. By the way, could there be a better son to be conformed to than that one? If you think about it, in Jesus, is he not completely in his thinking, in his conduct, and in his labor conformed completely to the Father? So guess what? When we get conformed to his image, we'll be that same way. Thinking, living, and laboring just like the Father. Okay, now, that destiny, let's talk about that again. Let me get back over there to that verse. I just want you to see why the use of that word instead of, all right, to be conformed to the image of his Son. You do know the way this verse normally gets talked about. The way this verse normally gets talked about is that God predestinated some people to be saved and other people to not be saved. But is salvation even the subject matter here? Not at all. In fact, if you're not already saved, you can't be conformed to the image of his Son. This is something that can only be done for someone who is already justified unto eternal life. You've already got to be saved. So I just want to be careful, because there's a lot of people that run to this verse. They'll teach the doctrines of Calvinism, and they'll try to talk about this is God determining who is going to be saved and who is going to be lost. And that's not the context of this at all. That's not this verse. You'd really have to tear this verse up to make it say that. This is talking about those that are going to be laboring with the Father in his business, and there's something they need. They need to be conformed to the image of God's Son. Okay, now, there's something marvelous happening here. This, to me, is very, very exciting. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I almost wanted to stand up and cheer when this finally clicked with me. The day I saw this, I thought, this is one of those marvelous things I've got to keep my mouth shut about, so when we get there, I won't have already ruined it for you. So here we are. Do you realize that, just think for a minute. Just look at that verse and think for a minute. He has predestined. In other words, He has set your destiny ahead of time. Now remember, we've come out of 28, and you know who 28 is talking to. Them that love God, them who are the called according to His purpose. That's sons and daughters engaged in the sonship education. And God has preset a destiny for them. He has preset a destiny for them, and that destiny is that they will be conformed to the image of His Son. That's the power the curriculum has to do that. Now, do you know what the good part of that is? Now, if that thing is preset, what does that tell you? It's going to happen. In other words, if you can't veer off those rails. Now, I'm going to give you a caveat to that. As long as you continue down this road. Because there's one thing the curriculum can't fix, and that's if you quit. If you decide, I'm done, then you're done. Will God let you walk away? Sure He will. You're an adult son, you've got liberty, you can do that. But now here's my point. If He says, I predestinated you to be conformed to the image of my Son, as long as you continue in the education, look, this is the point where I really wish everybody was here. Because this answers the question, I don't doubt the curriculum, I doubt me. And here's what God's saying. If you continue in the curriculum, that's where it's going to take you. Can you imagine someone coming to, we're leaving, and let's say they run into Bertha down at the store, and they say, I'm trying to get to Grand Falls. How do I get to Grand Falls? And here's what Bertha would say. That street you're on right there, take that right out of town, and don't make any turns. Stay on that road. It will run you right into Grand Falls. You can't help but go to Grand Falls as long as you continue on this road. When they get in their car, how confident can they be that they're going to get to Grand Falls? If they believe you, they can be supremely confident, can they not? This is what your Father's trying to do. You want to know how much confidence you can have in this curriculum? As long as you stay on this road, you will wind up at the final destination. You will get there. You don't have to worry. Am I smart enough? Am I a good student? Am I going to be able to figure it out? You don't have to worry about that. Because remember your part? Do you remember your part? Bertha actually gave it away a while ago when I said, how confident can they be that they're going to get to Grand Falls? She said, if they believe you. And that's the same way with your Father, right? If you can believe what He tells you. And what He's telling you here is, I have set your destiny. I've set your final destination, and that is for you to be conformed to the image of my Son. You will have arrived. I just look at that and I think, it can't be any better than that. God has set your destiny. You're just not going to... I almost want to say it like this. If you don't quit, you can't mess it up. Now that's saying something. Because usually all we have to do is be in it and we'd mess it up. God says you can't, this curriculum will produce this. Just stay on the road and keep going. Now, that is a real confidence builder. That is something that we look at and we think, man, that statement is guaranteeing the success of the sonship education. You really are going to get there. I wish I could say that 10 times so that everybody would get it. But I know you understand the words, but once you read that, that should go a long ways to alleviating any fear, any doubt. I mean, you look around and you go like, well, I think, so-and-so and so-and-so will get there, but I just don't know if I can. This should go a long ways to eliminating that doubt. Because you notice he didn't say, for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate most of them to be conformed to the image of his Son. God said, I've set your destiny. If you're in this sonship education, this is where you're going. And you can't help but get there as long as you continue along. And that means you really are going to be able to labor with him in his business. So think about it. Before you ever came along, he said, I knew I was going to have sons and daughters. I knew they were going to labor with me in my business. And so I'm going to call them to an education. And if they'll continue in that education, I have set their destiny before they were ever born. You remember the old Star Wars deal where Darth Vader says to Luke, it is your destiny. You remember that? That's what I think of. This is your destiny. This is where you're headed. Don't give me that look. This is where you're going. What? You weren't around when Star Wars was here? Oh man, so sheltered. So the pattern, now by the way, when he says conformed, and let's talk about that word for a second. I don't think I'm going to need to change the verse. But when he says, now here's what he predestinated you to be conformed. If you conform something, what does that mean? To shape it. Yeah, you actually see the word form in the word, don't you? And it means to arrange it. But if you conform to something, what is that taking for granted? Not just that you're going to be shaped in a certain way. You're going to be changed, but what else do you know about it? It will happen. Okay, I like that Gloria's got that down. It will happen. But in being conformed, you don't just have the thing that's being formed or shapen or changed, but what else do you have to have? Huh? Thought? Yeah, that's true, but I'm looking for something else. You got to have a pattern to be conformed to, right? What's the pattern here? No, not the education. What's the pattern? The image of his Son. That's the pattern. In other words, there's the pattern, and now we're going to be conformed to that. You can't conform something if there's not something you're conforming it to. That's the point I'm trying to get to. Conforming it means you're lining up with something else. The something else is the image of his Son. Now I think I've got this in the... No, I don't. Okay. I was going to say, I thought I had that down in there, that conformed, because it means to be shaped after a pattern, and so you first have to have the pattern. Now, when you think of the pattern, this is the way I used to think about this when I'd read this verse in the old days. When you think about being conformed to the image of Jesus, well, the image of his Son, you know what defaulted in your mind? His earthly ministry again, right back in Israel's program. Don't think about that. You know what? Do you know what his thoughts are today? His thoughts are not the Sermon on the Mount. His thoughts today is not the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. His thoughts today are in line with being the head of the body of Christ. That's His thoughts today. And that's who you're being conformed to, the image that you're being conformed to. He's thinking, do you want me to tell you what He's thinking? He's thinking everything in the sonship curriculum. That's what He's thinking, because He knows it. That's what's in His mind. Now, when He says to be conformed to the image of His Son, give me another word for image. Likeness. Okay. What did you say, Bertha?
Picture.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Those are close synonyms. Likeness and image, picture, those are all close synonyms. But there is a shade of difference between these, and that's what I want to get to. For instance, let me take you back to Genesis 1. And God said, let us make man in our image. And then look at the next one, after our likeness. Now those are close, but they're not, they have a different shade of meaning here. Even the preposition is different. You get made in an image, but after a likeness. So what is an image? What is it that we're supposed to understand about an image? And I think I've got this in the notes. No, I don't. Well, it's in your notes. But an image, this is really...
If you mess up your image, you mess up your reputation and your
There's a definition for it, okay? But
all have the same image. Stick figure.
okay. An image is, I'm going to just read this right out of the notes for you here. Image is a thing in which the aspect, form, or character of another is reproduced, as in a copy or a living image. A person with a resemblance to another, we even use the word, they're the spitting image. Don't we say that? So when you're saying we all have that same image. An image. Now this Charles Smith, I looked in his book on synonym. This is really great. He says an image represents another. And I thought, now isn't that interesting? Because when they made a graven image, what did that do? It represented a false god. An image represents another. And I thought about that. Wait a minute. We're going to be conformed to the image of Christ. It's almost like it's saying, when you're there, you represent Him. When you're judging angels, this is not a clone. Okay, now Bertha's trying to take us off into Star Wars again. When you're there, the angels aren't looking at you like you're some second rate. They're looking at the representation of Jesus Christ. They're looking at a representative of Jesus Christ. But just to say this another way, well, I was going to ask you a question about that. Let me see if I can find that. In order to do that, I need to get back to this verse, but I got a verse to give you before we do that. In order to predestine you to be conformed to that image, God had to give you two things. First of all, He had to give you a curriculum which would produce that. And you have that in front of you. And also, He's going to, in doing that, He's going to give you something else. He's going to give you a curriculum, but He doesn't just give you a curriculum and say, there you go. He also gives you the Spirit who lives in you that is going to do something with you with regard to that curriculum. Does anybody remember what that was? We saw it back in orientation. He intercedes, but even back further than that. It was that one sentence definition of a son that we saw back in Romans 8:14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God. If you're being led, that means you're going somewhere. And where is the Spirit leading us? He is leading us through the sonship curriculum. Is He not? And so the Father gives you that Spirit. He gives you that curriculum for as many as, and you know what, I'm looking at that word are here, like we looked at that are in the previous verse in 28. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Remember we talked about that being that one sentence definition of a son. So if you're being led to a, I love this, you're being led to a destination, and God has preset that destination. Now, that's a very remarkable testimony of the power of the sonship curriculum, that it's going to take everybody. Look, this is amazing to me. No matter when you live in the dispensation of grace, no matter where you live in the world, no matter what your background, it has the ability to take every single one of them to that final destination. And that's just, to me, that's incredible. Okay, now, I'm going to turn you over to 2 Corinthians for a moment, because I want to show you something about this. I know that that's kind of jumping ahead, but remember, the Corinthians had gotten off track. They had quit their sonship education. The Apostle Paul writes 1 Corinthians to get them back, and then once they do, he begins to now teach them things that they should have learned right here where we are in Romans 8. But they missed that. So he's having to redo that with them. And so the confidence of his predestinating them, they didn't have that. So now he's going to talk about this issue a little bit in 2 Corinthians. So now remember what you're predestined to be conformed to the image of God's Son. So now look at what he says to the Corinthians in chapter 3, verse 18. But we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. Who's the one leading you through that sonship curriculum? It's the Spirit. Who is the one here that it says is going to be involved in this process? The Spirit of the Lord. And what's He doing? We all, I really like this. And we all with open, by the way, you do understand when he's writing this in 2 Corinthians, he's talking to all who are involved in the sonship education. He's not talking about everybody in the world or even just every believer. He's already, I jumped you down to verse 18. Really, there's important information sitting in the first 17 verses that make me just say things that may not sound, but we all with open face, all right, let's just do this. What does it mean we behold with open face? The only way to know what that is, that's an unfair question. The only way to know what that is if you have read the first 17 verses, because he tells you about something in those 17 verses that makes this verse make sense. So let me just explain it, because I didn't put them in the PowerPoint. Earlier in this chapter in 2 Corinthians 3, he's going to refer them back to something that happened in Israel's history that they're very aware of. Moses had gone up on the mount to get the tables of stone. When he went up to get those tables of stone, in the presence of God, the glory was so great, the Bible says his face shined. When he came down off the mount and the people of Israel saw that shining face, it frightened them. And they didn't want to look at him. It was weird. I am going to take you there just to show it to you. Oh, well, here it is in verse 7. But if the ministration of death... See, I didn't take you back because he's talking about the law, and he's saying, you know we're not under the law. But the ministration of the law had a glory to it. And if it had a glory to it, think how much more glory the administration of grace has. That's the point he's going to make. But he says, but if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones... can I just stop here and make a statement about this? The ministration of death. Why is written and graven in stones? You know what that is. That's those 10 commandments he came down with, right? Why is that called the ministration of death? Why would God refer to it that way? I'll tell you why. Because that's exactly what trying to keep the law produced. Could they do it? No, they couldn't. And if you try to serve God out of that law, you don't lose your salvation, you don't die physically. How do you die? Give me a different word, and you know this word. You're very familiar with this word. What kind of death? It's not eternal death. Functional death. Functional death. Do you remember when we talked about functional life? That's how you live for God every day. To try to keep the law and serve God is functional death. Do you know what really the 10 Commandments are? They're your death sentence. If you try to keep them to be saved, what's going to happen to you? If any man tries to keep the law to be saved, what's going to happen to him at the end? Is he going to be saved? He's going to hell. So guess what? Those now become they become now the instruments of his eternal death. If he tries to keep the law to serve God, now they're the testimony of his functional death. Do you see? So no matter which way you slice it, the law produces death. So Paul calls it the ministration of death. But look, when someone goes around and they go, I just think we ought to post the 10 Commandments up on our church. Why would you post your death sentence? Really? I mean, I know you weren't taught to think about them that way, but Paul's telling you to think about them that way. If you're going to keep the law to serve God, God totally rejects everything you do. Everything you do. That's why we had Romans 6 and 7. He did nothing but discuss that issue in 2 chapters. And by the way, it's not just the law of Moses. How about if I make a law for us? It won't be the law of Moses, but it'll be a list of do's and don'ts that I think you ought to do. God says, if you're going to serve me out of any law, I'm going to reject everything you do. Wow. Now, you've been through that. I don't need to belabor that point. So when Paul calls it the ministration of death, that shouldn't be a shock. But if the ministration of death, written and engraven in stones, was glorious, how was it glorious? So that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses for the glory of his countenance, which glory was to be done away. In other words, did his face glow forever? No, it eventually dimmed down, didn't it? Got back to normal. Now, I'm going to take that's what's sitting in 7, and take you back to the event in Exodus 34. What I got left? Just enough time to read this. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. And Moses called unto them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him. They must have been running away. When they returned unto him, and Moses talked with them, and afterward all the children of Israel came nigh. And now here's the nation now. And he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. So it wasn't quite so creepy to look at. It was freaking them out. So he wore a veil and spoke through the veil. Now, I hope I can take you back. No, I got to go back. But we all, with open face. What does that mean now that we say no veil? You know what? If you're wearing a veil, what does that do to your sight? It clouds your vision or blocks it, right? Here's what God says. But we all with open face, there is no veil here, behold something. Behold as in a glass the glory of the Lord. Now you've already been told something about this glory in Romans 8. And are changed into the same image from glory to glory. All right, here's the last thing I'll tell you, and then we'll take our break. What does that mean? You're changed into the same image from glory to glory. What is that a description of? What is he talking about? You're changed from glory to glory. Does that not indicate to you that there is a glory and then another glory that exceeds that one, and another one that exceeds that one? And guess what? As you progress through the sonship education, you are changed from glory to glory. That's what's going to happen with you. And we'll see it when we come back from the break, but look, you've already, well, okay. By the way, his face shone because of that glory, but that glory was going to be done away with. Guess what about your glory? It'll never be done away with. That's why he's saying, if the ministration of death was glorious, which glory was to be done away, I should have put verse 8 in there. In fact, we'll read it when we come back. Verse 8 was, how much more glorious is this grace? When he's telling you this, he's saying, it's not just, by the way, you know, if we suffer with him, we also be what? Glorified together with him. And the glory that you get, look, if you die now, is there any glory for you whatsoever? Yes. Yes. But let me ask you, when you become a simple son, will there be more glory?
Yes.
And when you become a young man, is there more glory? And how about when you become a wise man? And then when you become a man of, you know what? You are changed from glory to glory to glory. Okay, well, we'll tie that up and move